All right. I think we are set. Bernd, welcome.
Hey, what's happening, Brian?
Welcome, everyone. Sorry about the delay. I hit the start and it didn't go live, and I didn't notice it. We were like halfway through the timer, and I looked up and it said go live. I was like, yeah, I guess we should go live. So I started everything over. So for those of you who are late, that was perfect for you. Let me know how the audio is, if there's any drama. Oh, I see Luke Whittington down there. What's up, Lucas? We need to get you on here.
Luke.
In fact, yeah, just jump on right now. Yeah, so we're getting things sorted. We're a little discombobulated tonight. I should say I'm discombobulated tonight because I've been doing other things. So if this seems a little bit of a train wreck tonight, that's because it is. But we're gonna have fun nonetheless. Everybody says it's looking good, sounding good, feeling good. Okay, cool. So we're going to get into it tonight. We got Bernd Knox with us. He's going to do introductions of himself. He's been on the show already before with the normal audio podcast, but we'll give him a few minutes to introduce himself for those of you who are new. What's that?
Years ago now.
Yeah, in the beginning. But remember, you and Brad were on not too long ago. It was probably 6 months ago, maybe, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah. But we'll talk about a few things just kind of leading up to that. But tonight's just kind of a BS session. Same thing as before. You can ask questions, but we're going to be kind of engaged. Super chats, you'll definitely get your question answered. I hate to sound transactional, but that's the only way I can guarantee that your question is going to get answered. And I'm only drinking water tonight. Barrett looks like he's already on his fifth beer tonight.
Not quite.
No. I haven't had a drink. I haven't had a drink in like a week. I guess I'm saving myself for going back to work. I shouldn't say that, but I am.
Yeah. Don't fly us. I've heard somebody say
that. Well, I spend a lot of time in the hotel, so I got a lot of reserve time coming up ahead of me. Let's see what else. So I do want to draw people's attention to one. Do me a favor. Go down, hit the little like stupid thing, the little thumbs up. Just do that. It's not going to cost anything. If you're watching this on playback, you can go ahead and do that too. Those things matter. They help. They really do. The algorithm is a nasty devil, and those things are greatly appreciated. Additionally, I do want to draw your attention, not to shill, but I do want to draw your attention. I'm going to pull it up here on the stream. We do have a merch store, which there's all kinds of stuff here, but the things that I want to draw your attention to, because they are for a good cause, is you've got these ones. Let me see if I can pull it up here. You've got these ones with this alligator looking Apache, and then this cool strike eagle. These all came from an artist by the name of Steve George. He's a British guy, and he kind of does these doodles. He does all these for charity, and I saw his stuff a long time ago, and I was like, man, that's really cool. I want to get that on the merch. So I contacted him. We had a phone call, things like that. And, he's like, well, I do everything for charity. I said, cool. Let's split it, however you want to do it. So he's like, well, 20%. I was like, no, 40%. Here you go. So 40% of whatever we make off of those goes to the charity. And that is to the Royal, I'm sorry, it's a long name, Royal Fleet Arm Air Museum, something like that. I'm screwing up the words. But essentially it's a memorial for the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm. So that's where a portion of those proceeds go. So anyway, I just draw your attention to those, because if you don't mention it, then people don't know about it. But you guys can check out the merch store. The link should be down in the notes of the show. All right, so we got all that nonsense out of the way. A big thank you, guys, for coming here and just hanging out with Barrett and I. We got a few topics to talk about. We'll get through some stuff that's sort of trending in the news, and then just go into some other topics that Barrett and I had kind of just bounced off each other. So the big one right now, unfortunately, looks like a couple of different crashes. And one just happened yesterday down in Florida. And let's see, Jake, if you can find that video.
Yep.
Have it pulled up.
Let's see. I've got the one you sent me for Australia. I don't see the one you sent me for Florida. I'm not sure if I got that one.
I think I've got it. Let me see if I can pull it up myself.
Yeah, I saw a couple articles on it, but I didn't find a video. First I've heard of it, though.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me share the screen. And there it is. All right. Hopefully that's...
Dang.
Yeah. So I'm going to mute it. Now, apparently, I've even seen that all 3 of the people involved in this survived, or I've seen 2 of 3. I think it's still kind of early. I don't really know what the deal is. But we'll try to avoid too much. But as you can see, this helicopter is on fire. And it looks like the fire is kind of at the tail, like the root of the tail, like where the fuselage goes into the tail. And it seems to be flying for a while. This is actually a good video of it because it does fly for quite some time. Now I can't control this video.
Can you tell what it is? Is it a 145?
Yeah, it's a Eurocopter. It was a fire rescue, as you can see. I can't get rid of that pause. I don't know if that's showing up. But you can see it's been flying for a while. And I know there was reports that they had called in and said, hey, we got a problem with the aircraft. And eventually the tail just collapsed. And it spun out of control, hit an apartment. But like I said, I'd actually seen that at least 2, if not all 3, had survived. I don't know if that's changed. I don't know if I was reading bad info. They still obviously don't know what caused the fire. That's just kind of a strange place to have a fire. I don't know much about Eurocopters.
Yeah, I mean, I don't either, but that's where I would speculate the oil cooler is. Maybe the oil cooler busted out and that provided some of that, flammable material back there. You got an engine fire right at the tail boom fuselage connection point. But I'm just purely speculating, but obviously sure. As soon as that tail boom separated, the CG shifted and he came to an instantaneous stop and then just went vertical.
Yeah, the 2 things that jumped out at me is, 1, like I said, just a fire in a strange place, but that actually makes a lot of sense. And then 2 was the fact that they seem to be flying for quite some time with that, which there's not going to be any notification. At least I can't imagine that aircraft has any sort of fire notification system in a cockpit in that area. Nothing I ever flew did. You don't have fire sensors everywhere. It's generally just the engines or, something like that, APU.
Yeah. It's too bad Luke's not on because he flew those LUHs, so he might actually have some insight. It's a 135 I see in the chat. Yeah, so so we all out there may have some insight into what was happening, but obviously a bad deal. But yeah, looks like they knew then. Somebody was saying here in the chat that they were turning back and probably trying to find a clear area to get into. And it just turned into a little bit too long.
But yeah, and I see that they had turned back, and I did see that there was some chatter. I didn't hear anything in the radio back and forth that I saw that talked about a fire. And that's why I say I wonder if they knew they had fire, because yes, they had a fire alarms and suppression, but that's what I'm getting at. It's like not everywhere in the aircraft has that. So like in the Apache, if you're tail is on fire, you're not going to know that unless somebody tells you. There's not an alarm that's going to tell you your tail is on fire. Yeah, exactly. I don't suspect they realized it was as bad as it was, because I think, and again, I'm not second guessing anything they did. Obviously they did the best they could with the decision or the information that they had. But I think had they known it was a fire, I think I would have just landed anywhere. I would have just put it down on the street. So that's what tells me I don't think that they necessarily knew there was a fire. They just knew there was something wrong.
Yeah, I agree. Right. You can't ever second guess. And, you feel comfortable until you don't. And then, a lot of times, unfortunately, sometimes the decisions don't work out.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think from like a Kiowa standpoint. You'll remember this better than me, but if you had some sort of problem in the oil cooler, really it would just be a pressure. Was there even a temperature indication in the cockpit? I can't remember.
Yeah, so you would get oil temp high, but that pressure system, and it's probably the same in the EC. But if it's like at the oil cooler, that's it's probably, if you had a crack in it or if one of the lines separated or something, it would probably blow all that oil out within half a minute or so. And so you'd in rapid succession get low oil pressure, and then you'd get low oil quantity, and then then it would start to overheat. Then you'd get high engine oil temp, things like that. And then if maybe there's metal fatigue and some bearings grinding, and that caused that critical spark that caused. I mean, oil isn't really flammable in and of itself. Maybe it was hydraulic fluid, something, who knows? But or a fuel line popped. I mean, that would be probably the most likely if a fuel line popped and it sprayed on the hot section. Turn into a fire pretty quick.
Yeah. So a variety of things that could have happened. It's unfortunate. I mean, it's amazing, honestly, when you watch it and to see kind of where it went down. It's amazing that anyone walked away from it. So that's, good news. But yeah, I was just interested I'm interested to see how that plays out and what was the culprit, if they can figure it out. But yeah, from watching that video, when I watched it, I was like, I don't think they know at that point that they're on fire. Because I think they probably would have tried to put it down. And that's always my fear with fire, is like, if the aircraft's on fire, it's over time, like what kind of structural damage is that going to cause? But
yeah.
All right. Let's see. Jake says I have an article of the damage on the ground. Yeah, if you can pull that up, let's just see.
Yeah, it's no loss of life is good, but it looks like it's a miracle that that's all there was, because this is pretty brutal here in this apartment building here.
Yeah. Can you enhance?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Right on top of it. Okay. Yeah.
It's pretty ugly and unfortunate, but like I said, it's good that there weren't more people there, I guess.
Yeah. See where the exhaust comes out right there at the tail boom fuselage connection.
Yeah. No, unfortunate. And then shifting gears to another crash that just happened over Sunday. So this is something I've been sort of paying attention to lately, just out of interest, with the Osprey, these hard clutch engagements that have been happening over time. And of course, the Osprey is just one of those aircraft that's been kind of known as, just having issues. I've talked to Osprey pilots, they all tell me it's great and wonderful and they love it. But to kind of dig into it, there's been a lot of these issues with these clutch engagements. And then more recently, there was one back, what was it, March, I think, March or May?
Yeah, about a year and a half.
Yeah, so in 2022, killed 5 Marines. There's some back and forth with the family, with the spouse of one of the pilots, talking about, that the Marines had made promises about things that they'd repaired. And I guess the reason that this kind of struck a chord with me is because, and I'm sure you saw it too in your career, we had a couple of things where there were maintenance issues on aircraft, and it was kind of like the military just can't fix it all at once, So I'm thinking about the, I can't remember what part it was on the rotor for the Apache. Do you remember what that component was? I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, they had the strap packs. They were, this is when the Echo first came out. Like, there was a whole bunch of new design changes, and every new aircraft, there's a crop of issues that take some time to develop, and it had.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just keep what issues it did have. I'll let somebody else divulge that. But one of the known ones was the strap packs, and can't remember if they were delaminating but nevertheless, there's take some time for a lot of these things to crop up. I was reading up on those MV-22s, apparently they'd known about it for a while, and in the media, they made a big deal out of it, about the Navy didn't tell us. And it's like, well, there's material issues in your car, it doesn't necessarily become a media storm because there's a systemic maintenance issue on a certain part on a certain airframe. Like they all have them. And so that doesn't immediately mean that the DoD has to go, like put the garage door up and, with a megaphone say, hey, we found this problem, right? So if it becomes a systemic issue over years and years, then maybe it becomes noteworthy. But obviously this resulted in a couple of Class A's. So that I would say that's pretty noteworthy. And, there were some fleet groundings. I think the USMC grounded the fleet a couple of times, and that is routine. It happens to every aircraft out there. When there's a problem that comes up, a lot of times it'll generate something called they'll issue basically an airworthiness check where they have to go ground the fleet and pop all the covers off and check whatever that component is. And sometimes it's pretty extensive. So if they have to dig into a lot of aircraft, it might take a while to do it. And it impacts readiness. So, that's not something that's taken lightly. So if it's something that causes catastrophic failures, clearly that the right thing to do is to do the analysis and figure out what the problem is. And I think they thought they had figured out what the problem was. I'm somewhat of I won't say I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I'm a show me, I don't believe that everybody is all on the up and up all the time. And people are motivated to withhold information sometimes too. But, there's no reason to suspect that there's sort of some nefarious plot going on here. Like all aircraft have these kinds of issues. And I think the MV-22 has a pretty good safety record comparatively.
Yeah, I think across the aggregate, if you look at it, it's, it does well. But I think it's one of these where when something happens, it's so catastrophic and so, attention getting that it sounds, I don't want to say sounds worse than it is, but it, it just grabs everyone's attention and it reminds them of the thing that just happened, even though it just happened was a couple of years ago. And of course, coming from that aircraft, the other optics of it is because one, it's, revolutionary type design, but also two, it had such a sort of stunted growth at the beginning of having these issues. I think too, one of the things that I kind of latched onto was this hard clutch engagement situation has been known for quite some time. And the Air Force, it looks like the Air Force stopped flying them for a while, but the Marines kept flying them. And so then that kind of goes into that optics as well of well, you don't care about Marines because you guys didn't stop flying them and the Air Force did. There could be so many other factors involved in that, like you said.
Yeah. Hey, shout out to BSD. I just saw their shout out to me. Throw it back. And especially early on in development, like in the 80s when the Black Hawk was coming out, those were called lawn darts. They had this problem with the stabulator where they had uncommanded full down. So you'd be cruising along at 110 knots and the stabulator would just uncommanded schedule full down. And of course, when you do that, it just noses over and goes right into the dirt, right? And they had a slew of incidents with that happening. And I don't remember whether it was EMI, some sort of radio frequency interference on the actuator or something, whatever it was. But they grounded the fleet for a good long while until they came up with a new component to stop that happening. And here we are 40 years later, and that's probably the most successful helicopter program there's ever been, So I remember F-18s and F-14s, like they were killing a lot of people when they were first flying those things.
I remember the F-16 was a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, in this article here, Brian points out that I just wanted to point this out. This article actually even shows and talks about from Marine Corps times that the Osprey has an average mishap rate lower than both the Harrier, the Hornet, and the Lightning.
Yeah. Yeah. So what they've done with that program, I mean, I'm not defending anything, but that's pretty impressive when you look at the complex. Nobody has ever built a tilt rotor before. And that's why it was so expensive. That's why it had a lot of teething problems. Like you got to work those issues out. And I think first of all, everybody that straps on a green, a blue, or a gray military aircraft does so knowing that there is some risk involved, right? Whether you're sitting in the back or you're behind the controls, like everybody that gets in one of those things knows exactly that there is an element of risk. You mitigate that with training and maintenance and all those other things that go into it, but nobody's I think we all have the utmost faith in our maintainers. Like nobody gets in a military aircraft with any sort of doubt about their maintainers. So that's a bond of trust that we all have, and nothing happens without those guys doing what they do. So
yeah, and there's some comments that I was going to say the same thing. I think it goes back to optics, right? Because that's a great data point that their overall safety record is better than an F-18, a Harrier, or whatever. But that's exactly the point, right? A F-18 goes down, one, the guy can punch out, but two, it's only one dude, maybe two, depending on the type. And Osprey goes down, nobody's punching out. And yeah, there's 20 people in the back. I don't know if I carry that many, but I don't know, however many people it can carry, that's how many people are going with it. And so obviously that's a problem. And then of course now we have one that just went down on Sunday. Of course we don't know what caused it, but all this news about hard clutch engagements back and forth with the families had just been kind of in the news, and then this happened on Sunday. So I'll be interested to see what's going on there. I think surprisingly, once again, one of these where an aircraft goes down and a lot more people survive than you would maybe think about it. I didn't see the crash. I don't think there's any video of it. If there is, I have not seen it. But I think they had 20 survivors, and I think 3 were killed. Now I'm drawing a blank because I remember reading the article and I can't remember if it said 3 were killed. Looks like both the pilots and then a corporal. I'm not sure if he was a crew member or if he was just a guy in the back, but
yeah.
So over time, I guess we'll see what transpired there. But
yeah, and it's kind of a morbid topic. Like it's something that we lived. People, I guess find it interesting, but there's something that statistics, you can compare accident rates from, for instance, F-18 to MV-22 to UH-60 to whatever. Like what's lost in that sauce and that algorithm is maybe they didn't parse out training accidents versus material failure or whatever. Like the flight regime in F-18 is nothing like an MV-22, which is nothing like a UH-60, et cetera. So how many of those are material failure? How many of those are hard landings on a carrier deck, and pitching seas in the middle of the night? Like there's inherent risk in each of those mission sets, flying goggles at 50 feet near wires. Like you may have wire strikes. That's a class A, but that's a mission related risk. Like material failures, I would say are exceedingly rare. Most crashes probably are, I hate to say it, but they're either training failures or, human mistakes, a moment of inattention, people doing stupid stuff. There's a lot of reasons, but material failure in these things is comparatively pretty rare, statistically pretty rare.
Well, and we always talk about like the chain of events, right? And all those things can lead in. You can have a material failure and still walk away from it. Sometimes it's how quickly you recognize it. It's do you do the right actions when it happens? And again, we're not Monday morning quarterback and pilots. Everybody makes mistakes. It's just sometimes you end up making a mistake at the wrong time. I mean, I've been personally the investigator for an aircraft that it was a material failure, but it was a crew misidentifying what it was that then caused a greater failure. Like it would have been completely survivable. Like, you lose an engine. Okay, we got another one. Well, if you pull off the wrong engine, now you got no engines.
Yeah.
And so material failure, but crew mistakes kind of lead into that. I think too, the sort of the second order effect of this is the impact it has on the flight crews, though. Because I remember like the strap packs. I'm glad you reminded me that that's what it was, but that was a big deal. I was in Iraq on my last deployment when that became a big deal. And I remember listening in on phone calls with like our brigade commander, with higher ups, and with, you know, senior warrants and stuff, talking about this issue. And there was a lot of concern about dudes, you know, strapping on the aircraft because they just did not have the confidence that the equipment that they had was gonna you know, maintain. So over time, when these things, they also kind of build up into the psyche of people that, you know, I don't want to take as many risks. I don't want to fly as much. You know, it just kind of has the second order effect that you can't really pin the tail on and say this is the effect. It's just over time it can wear down on some folks.
Yeah. You know, add to that the environments, especially helicopters, the environments they operate in and have been operating in for the last 20 years. Like, they were designed, I think we outflew their design life by like 10 times or something, or the op tempo, right? You commander, you were a commander, so you knew by the books, like you had an operational tempo that was funded in at home station for like, you know, a couple hundred hours a year or something like that per airframe. Sure. And then they project that out to, you know, over the life cycle of the aircraft. You know, let's say it's 5,000 hours. So they think the service buys that helicopter or plane or whatever with a design cycle in mind. And let's say it's 20 years. And at the end of that, you know, in 1980, I guarantee you in 1980, we did not think we were going to be flying AH-64s, UH-60s, and CH-47s in 2023.
Right.
Yeah, here we are. I mean, some of them are new builds. Most of them are new builds now, but nevertheless, you know, the Kiowa I flew was built in 1969. So
yeah. And even if they were, certainly not with the amount of flight hours that they have under their belt from the GWAT. I don't think anyone, you know, anticipated that level of flying. But yeah, what was the one in the 58 we had? What was it? Cracks in the tail boom? Wasn't that a thing that was?
Yeah. So yeah, there's four bolts. So they called it the donut, I think, where the tail boom attached to the fuselage. And if I remember right, there was 4, you know, hardened steel bolts that hold that thing on. If they're not shimmed right, remember you used to you push on the tail boom and then kind of keep your hand right there and you could feel the metal flex a little bit. That's what we were looking for. Like, totally not something that your line pilot really should ever know about. But, you know, if you got a good maintenance pilot that mentors you and says, here, take a look at this, you know, look at how much when you're doing your tail rotor bearing check, right? Like how much play is in the bearings. Like you mentioned, like in your airline life, you know, you kick the tire. Yeah, there's 4 tires. That's good pre-flight. You were mentioning it the other day, like in the military, we pay a little closer attention just because we have a little bit more intimate relationship with the machines that we're flying in every day. And you learn a lot more, you know. I think as a commercial pilot, you just kind of show up and get in the seat for the most part. You would know better than I.
Feels that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels that way. Well, I think too, and I've not flown commercially with helicopters. I'd be interested to know like how much more of an in-depth pre-flight and sort of review of the aircraft they do, because in the airlines, they're running all the time. I mean, those aircraft, just like they never get turned off. But they have a lot of maintenance people kind of pouring over them, you know, between flights and things like that. But at the end of the day, an airplane is just inherently more stable, right? I mean, there's just a million things that can go wrong with a helicopter. So I think that we as helicopter pilots know that. And so we spend a lot more time pouring over the thing. Hell, I probably look at the jet more so. I know I do, because I watch other FOs. Like if I'm, you know, trading out or I'm nearby and I see a guy doing a pre-flight, you know, he's just kind of walking around looking at stuff. I mean, I'll actually like, you know, look at certain particular things. And I think I probably look at it just a little bit more in detail. And that's just from, you know, that background being a helicopter guy. So I'd be interested to know how a commercial helicopter pilot, you know, how in-depth of a pre-flight do they do. I imagine it's pretty in-depth.
Yeah.
But somebody can tell us in the chat. Okay. Speaking of, we were talking right beforehand when we went live, and I wanted to bring this up. I was actually trying to get someone else on here with us, who's also in the airlines now, but was in the Army. but the timing was too short. But I wanted to bring this up. Jake, can you bring up that VA FAA article? So this article has been making the rounds. We've been kind of talking about it in the chat or in the Discord, but a bunch of pilots have been investigated officially by the FAA for the VA disability, basically checked out for fraud. The background on this is when you file for your disability, you're basically saying, hey, these things are wrong with me and it's the military's fault or, whatever. And you may be getting paid for that. You may not. You may get a 0%. You may be rated. In fact, I think I have one. It's, yes, you have this, but you get 0 for it.
Yeah.
In the old days, of course, government side, this side and that side didn't really talk very well. And so the FAA and the VA were kind of this two separate entities. What has happened recently is they are starting to talk. And what they have discovered is that there's a lot of pilots, a lot of former military pilots who have, they're getting up towards 100%. The percentage really doesn't matter, but they have things that they are recognized as having, and the FAA is not tracking it. So when you do your flight physical, which is very different in the civilian world than it is what we're used to in the military, but you're supposed to disclose all of your things, all of your disabilities. And so some guys have not done that because of just not understanding the system. Some guys have done that on purpose because they knew that it would cause a problem. And so what has eventually happened in the past, I'd say in the last 2 years, is the VA and the FAA are starting to talk. They're starting to compare notes. And the FAA has found that there's a bunch of pilots out there who are getting disability for something. And it could be things like PTSD. It could be things like heart conditions, whatever, sleep apnea. They're getting paid. They're claiming it. They have not told the FAA. And some of these things are automatically grounding, at least for an investigation, right? Just to make sure that they're safe to fly. But there is this article talking about there's 5,000 pilots. And in fact, I talked to one today. One messaged me today. So I'm not going to say his name, but someone that I respect a lot. He's been in the airlines for years, retired military, found out he's one of these people. And it's because he didn't realize, and I don't blame him for not knowing this, that even if you got 0%, even if the VA said, yes, you have this thing, but we're not giving you any percentage, the FAA wants you to report that. A lot of people haven't done that. I'm starting to worry. I don't remember if I did that. I'm pretty sure I did, but I don't know. I'm going to have to double check. But that can screw you up and that can ground you. But it kind of I wanted to ask you about it because one, you're not in the airline, so you don't have a dog in this fight. You're kind of unemotional about it because it is an emotional thing. I've seen a lot of people angry because the FAA and the VA are talking, which I don't really understand. I mean, it's the government. I mean, the government's talking to the government. Why you're surprised by that, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I've seen other people say, well, you shouldn't try to claim everything if you're going into the airlines. I have some thoughts on that. I'll share, but I just want to get your thoughts if you have any.
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? And I read in an article today that the article basically stated, like, it seems like some guys are trying to toe both sides of the line, and that's absolutely the case, right? So
I think so.
If you're retiring after 20 plus years in the military, like, you have some issues, legitimately so, and you should go claim them and get your disability compensation for it. On the other hand, if you're going to go fly or, be a doctor or any of the other things where those could be significant issues, like, the ethical thing is to properly report. I don't think I'm saying anything that anybody else wouldn't say, right? But for one thing, and as well as I and all the other military pilots in this chat, like, we spent our careers hiding our issues. Like, 100%. You don't go to the flight surgeon because unless you really need to, like, you got to be, there's got to be arterial blood coming out, right, before you go see that guy. Because it's very likely that they're going to find something, maybe even totally unrelated to the you go in for the flu or the sniffles or something, and it turns out, they put an EKG on you and you got a heart murmur or something. Guess what? Your flying career is over. So we tend to not self-report and kind of just suck it up. And then at the end of the military career, then when it comes time to like, all right, I've done my bit, now the government owes me, right? That's the mentality that a lot of people had. And then they come down with this book, you know, this ream of 200 sheets of claims, and, you know, rightly so. Like, you know, go for it. You don't get what you don't ask for, but then don't expect that not to have consequences afterwards, right? It's not hard to get 100% PTSD, I don't think, but you should realize that the consequences for being rated for 100 PTSD, like it's spelled out in the what do they call them? The APAs? No, that's the
whatever. Yeah.
Anyway, the VA tells you, like, to get 10%, this needs to exist. To get 30%, this needs to exist. If you go above 30%, like at 50%, now you have trouble interacting with people, and you have, you know, nervousness about being in public. And it's like, well, guess what? That's probably not conducive to being an airline transport pilot. So it's written down in a regulation on one hand, and then you think that there are no, you know, it's disingenuous for people not to claim it appropriately, right?
Well, I have 50%, so so I'm probably going to lose my 50% because I'm hosting a live show and I'm in the airlines. But yeah, 100%. You're right. I know there's people who've done good faith, like the person I talked to before. I know this guy. He it's an omission of not understanding, because the reality is, it is a confusing thing. It is not a set piece as the military physical, where you go in, it's like, okay, go to this station, do this, you know, it's very set. The civilian world, it's a lot more just kind of amorphous. The first time I did it, I was kind of like, is that it? We're done, you know? And there's not a lot of understanding of what the VA side and the FAA. So I think it's going to be discovery learning. So hopefully they can kind of see through some of that stuff and recognize, like, okay, you didn't put on your last physical that you've got a boo-boo on your left knee from 30 years ago, and you get 0% money for it. But I'm glad that they are talking. I've had this argument with people because, again, people kind of go back on the HIPAA thing. You're in the public trust. If you're a commercial pilot, you're carrying people in the back. We just had this guy attack a gate with an axe the other day. He's an airline pilot, attacked an inanimate object with an axe. Was he military? I don't know. You know, I don't know what his background was, but again, it goes to show, like, okay, we do need to take care of these things and at least recognize that, you know, okay, you have a rating for this thing. Let's just make sure that you're okay. You know, in my case, and I've been very open about, you know, my situation, I was rated for PTSD along with a few other things. I've got a total of 80%. The PTSD, the moment I found out about it, I had just gotten to class 1. So the moment I found out about it was like a month later. I called my doctor the next day and told him what was going on because I wanted to cover my butt. And he said, okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know. Start gathering your paperwork for your next class 1. We'll get together and we'll talk about it, but I'm not grounding you or anything like that. Okay, cool. I'm doing what, you know, the doctors have told me. And I went through the process. It is painful. And I hate it for people that, you know, have to go through it because it is a long process. But again, I would just encourage people to be honest. And I've talked about this in other places as well. It's one of those things you got to be upfront and honest about it. I think there's some people that did try to hide some things over time. And I think because the system was designed in such a way that you could, but now all that stuff's getting dragged out into the light. So, you know, I saw a comment, you know, don't tell anything to the VA. And that kind of goes to my next point, which is don't always count on your flying career. Just like you said right there, Bernd, is you could go into the doctor's office one day and find out you're not flying anymore, you know, and you feel fine, but something is wrong. Or what if there's something wrong with your family member? Right. So what if your wife or, you know, your spouse, your kid comes down with something that is not conducive for you to be gone half the month doing stuff? And now you've got to do a career change. I'm going to tell you, when I was grounded for like 2 months, that pension and disability was pretty awesome. Like, you know, I mean, I earned it, every bit of it, but it was good to have that. And I just warn people away from the idea of just, oh, I'm just not going to claim anything. I would say claim it, but just prepare yourself for the eventuality that, you know, get ahead of it now. handle it now and don't lie.
Yeah, I'm coming up on my last month of my last Army flight physical. So I'm a September baby. So I got 30 days left basically until my flight physical runs out. And I'm kicking around the idea of just going to an FAA and getting a class 2, an FAA examiner, and going and getting my class 2. But I know it's going to be a nut roll because, yeah, I got rated for sleep apnea, and a slew of other issues that, yeah, it's just going to make it hard to make it through that process. I don't know if I'm going to fly again or not. I'm not right now, but I always, and it's kind of psychological too. Like, I've never not had a flight physical, right? So it's almost a point of pride. Like, I've never missed a run. I've, never fallen out, like all those kinds of things. So, I've missed some time for what we talked about the other day. But yeah, never, always been a physically fit, etc. And the day comes when, hey, we all get older, and now I got to acknowledge, well, maybe I can't pass the flight physical anymore. But I know plenty of guys in their 60s and 70s that are in far worse physical condition is not the right way to describe it, but they are, more genteel, I should say, right? They're 2 hearing aids and Coke bottle glasses and whatnot, and they're doing autos out there at at Cairns with young kids. So age and experience can make up for youth and vitality in a lot of ways. But
well, and that's what I tell people too, right? Is once you get your foot in the door, generally speaking, you're okay. When I came back from Iraq on the second trip, I was suddenly diagnosed with something that generally only happens to Black females. I don't know why. Strangely enough, the VA acknowledged that I had it, but gave me a 0. But now that PACT Act is out, I'm going to refile for that because I think that it'll turn the corner. But my point is, another soldier in my unit from that deployment also came down with it. He had a flight packet. He was getting ready to go to flight school, but because he got that condition, he was grounded, barred permanently. That's it. He will never fly. It is an immediate grounding effect. For me, because I was already in the door, I just had to go through the waiver process. I had to, have a year of remission, have doctor's appointments. And now the FAA, the last time they sent me a thing was like, hey, you don't need to report on this anymore. Just let us know if something changes, but otherwise I was going to the doctor every month, every year, getting a report written by the doctor that says, hey, nothing's changed, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, don't worry about it anymore. So I share that with people just to understand, like, it does seem like a lot of work, but once you get through the door, you're probably okay. Just like you said, the experience. And I've flown with a lot of dudes that, they're a lot less healthy than me or you. They're probably not getting through that little door on the little window on the 737 in case something happens. But somehow they're passing their flight physical. But I think that's, kind of beyond what we've talked about so far. That's another problem that people have with this, because it feels like they're targeting veterans. Because if you're just Mr. Big Guy who, you got your fixed wing license when you were in your 20s and you joined the airlines and that's all you've been doing, you don't have a disability. Therefore, you don't have the VA to kind of tattle on you for something. There's no mechanism by which the FAA can force you to tell them that you have sleep apnea. You could go to a doctor, get sleep apnea, or whatever, and get treated for it and never tell a soul.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people are kind of upset, because they feel targeted by the VA or the FAA through the VA. I can get that. I don't know that it's meant that way, but I can see how it certainly feels that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And, the airline industry, I'm sure, is a good old boy club, it's a self-licking ice cream cone, right? Like the FAA Class 2 examiners need the business, and, the airline industry needs the examiners to keep their pilots certified. So, this investigation is going to have some trickle down effects in this situation that the industry's in now with, a declining pilot pool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm hoping what it will also do is maybe sort of clean out the pipes a little bit, in the sense that it does take a long time. If you're trying to do the right thing, it's taking a really long time, because the FAA only has so many people that can review packets. And now we probably know why, right? Because they've got 5,000 people. I think they've grounded 60 from this so far, out of like, or I'm sorry, maybe it's like 40 out of 600 or something like that. So again, odds are pretty good there, but I'm hoping that at the end of this is what they've done is at least kind of hit the reset on it all, and then maybe things will go a little bit faster. Because I think that's another concern. It was certainly a concern I had when I was submitting my paperwork. You know, when I turned that stuff in to the FAA, and I was okay to keep flying on my current class 1. I turned it in December. My current class 1 ran out in the end of February. I didn't know what was going to happen, right? So February 28th rolled around. I flew my last flight, and it was like, I have no idea how long I'm going to be out of work right now. And yeah, that's a troubling feeling, but luckily I had a pension and VA, disability to back it up. But, well, we'll move on from that. One thing I wanted to ask you, we were talking a couple days ago. For those who don't know, I'll plug it again. Authentic Media is a subscription service you can take a look at. It's a few bucks a month. They do multiple podcasts that you can get access to. I'm running a series over there. Bernd is one of my guinea pigs, but we were talking about an experience he had overseas where he was also shot. So you can kind of get the full details of that over there. But one of the things that we started to sort of touch on in that interview,
by the way, that got me 0%.
I also have 0%. I
present, but
I don't understand
present, but not compensatory.
Yeah, I don't get it. I'm gonna go to one of the. Well, I mean, if you don't mind me asking, what was your total percentage? What did you get?
I got 100.
Oh well, thank you. All right, good for you. You earned it. I'm gonna go to one of those things and try to work like because I don't get credit for sleep apnea. I don't get credit for the sarcoidosis, which I just talked about, which again, I think the PACT Act will cover that. So, I mean, I know guys who have sleep apnea, they got 50% just off of that. And I got nothing, but I got nothing for the shooting. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. The sleep apnea. I mean, I don't make the rules, but 50% right off the bat. Like if you have that diagnosis, like that's a huge in, right? So,
well, I think they got wise to it because I think a lot of people were claiming it. And so they were just handing it out like candy after a while. And I think finally they're like, whoa, like everyone has sleep apnea. Because I know I used to kind of like poo-poo it,
I can tell you that everybody of a certain age, when they're approaching retirement, the inside thing is, hey, did you go get your diagnosis yet? So I got mine because, I don't know, it was 6-7 years ago now, but I was feeling tired every day. And so I went and got tested, and lo and behold, I had sleep apnea. I was concerned though, because that generates when you have a sleep apnea diagnosis, you are done flying unless you get a waiver, and you have to show compliance. And, you got to be on the machine. Like if you want to fly and you have a sleep apnea diagnosis, in order to maintain your flight physical, you have to show that you are on it every single day and that it mitigates your issues.
And I didn't think, I kind of danced around the subject with the doctor because I was like, but you don't know what you don't know. And that was the problem I had with it. Was I was like, is this some kind of made up stuff? Like, do I really have it? Because the same thing with you. Like I was tired during the day. I couldn't really understand it. I knew I didn't sleep well. Turns out I had severe sleep apnea. And I tell you what, if I don't sleep with the machine, it's awful. I'm up all the time. So, to me, it was worth it. I know some guys are very apprehensive, right? Someone that you and I both know, I talked to him about it. He was very apprehensive to get it. And I said, at the end of the day, man, it's your quality of life. And I know it's going to be painful, but it's not the end of the world for flying, but it is something that you got to go through. Because like you said, you got to do the compliance. In fact, I think next month I got to go see a doctor and breathe into a tube. I got to get the report that shows how many times I use the machine, you know, all this stuff, so I can take it to my doc and show them for my compliance. So it is a chore, but the alternative is not being able to sleep. So I don't know. I think you got to take care of yourself.
You said you don't have a rating for it?
No.
Oh,
no, the VA gave me nothing for that.
Then. Yeah, you need to resubmit.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think that PACT Act will help with that as too. I think what they did eventually, instead of just handing it out automatically, I think they just wait for you to ask again. I think fundamentally that's probably what they do. Which I just haven't done it because I'm lazy. But anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about, it sort of ties into the mental health thing. We talked about you getting wounded in Iraq, and you said 2005. Am I right? 4. Okay. We talked a little bit about it, but I wanted to get into it because something reminded me of it the other day. In fact, Jake, I meant to give you the clip and I forgot all about it. Reintegration back home. I wanted to get an idea of what that was like for you, because it was a little weird for me. And I wonder if how coming home, not just from a deployment, but coming home deployment wounded, affected you.
So are you talking about the unit coming back and reintegrating, or
no, you reintegrating into society?
Okay. So, I mean, our experiences went on for 10 plus years, right? We had 3-4 deployments each. So each time was a little bit different. Towards the end, they were all kind of the same, like it had become routine. But that first time, like coming home, you know, I was medevaced out just like you were. And that's a long story. Go check out his, what's it called? The
Authentic Media. The
Authentic Media. Yeah, so it's a long story, but I got medevaced out of Iraq and then straight to launch duel, where they, you know, take you off the C-17 and bring you right into the triage center and kind of reassess you, which that was a whole experience in and of itself. You know, not to go off on a tangent, but it kind of funny. Like when I was laying there in the triage center and they were doing their initial assessment, the doc were like, "Why did they do that?" Right. And he was like, "Oh, we're gonna have to fix that." And they undid everything that the forward deployed docs had done, and that was more painful than actually getting shot, because they had to open it all back up again. Yeah. But anyway, so you know, the units forward, especially being deployed out of Germany, all that's left there is the families. So and life in Germany, we call it stairwell living. So you live in communities where the soldiers have either high rises, or there's multi-story buildings like on the installation itself. We happen to live in the economy on leased apartment buildings that the Army was leasing from the Germany. And when we deployed, like the family stayed back in those apartments, and it was like a giant sorority house, right? There were no guys left, and
they're having parties
down the apartment building halls all year long, and they kind of loved it they built some really tight bonds. And the friends we have from our Germany deployment are still the friends. I mean, this 20 plus years, like we seem to have the tightest bonds with those families that first deployment that we went with, and the wives and the, you know, other family members kept in touch with those families more so than other deployments later on. Yeah. So for me, it was like I came home. I couldn't go to work because there's no aircraft. I'm a pilot, you know, that has to walk around on crutches. And I had to go through rehabilitation, you know, convalescence, let the wound heal, and then go through rehabilitation, et cetera, et cetera. It took about 6 weeks. And the options are like, okay, you can stick this guy in an office and maybe have him do paper shuffling, something or other, but for me, it happened to work out pretty well, where they just kind of left me on my own, stayed at home every day, and went to the docs and did my physical therapy and whatnot. And then at the end of it, I just went back. So I was one of the few soldiers, I was one of the few husbands that was back home at the time. Like everybody else was forward, right? So we didn't have a whole lot of people that were coming back home. And if you were wounded, so I was in that gray area where I could go home and be released to my own care, basically, just to heal up. Yeah. I wasn't hospitalized for 6 weeks. Like if you were bad enough that you were screwed up so bad, you didn't go to launch. Maybe you went to launch school for them to stabilize you. Then you got put on a transatlantic flight and you went to San Antonio or Walter Reed or something else, right? Like if you were a burn victim or something like that. So that's a different experience. I term it, I got the golden bullet, right? The golden ticket, like just enough to go home. And then, healed up. I was definitely combat ineffective. I couldn't fly, couldn't do any military duties, etc. So it made sense to get out of theater to make the healing up process more efficient and then go back when you're done. But for me, mentally, it was, we talked about it, like there was a certain sense of guilt, like everybody's back, and it was the middle of summer too. Like I got wounded on Easter Sunday and I was back in launch school like 10 days later. So that would have been early May. That was before the truly atrocious heat hits in Iraq, right? So when you get into like June, like when I stepped off the plane in June, when I came back, it was a completely different Iraq than the one I'd left.
Right.
And they had been slowly acclimating to that. And things had been picking up. I would say that the reintegration back into the unit was more difficult for me because now all of a sudden, I just rewatched Band of Brothers about a couple of months ago. And you remember when there was a guy that he got wounded and he got sent back to the rear, and then I think he missed the Battle of the Bulge, and then he got put back in later on. And he was legitimately, like, he couldn't fight. There was no reason for him to be there with his guys. And when he got back, like he was treated like like an outsider. And I definitely felt that for a little bit. But I was also an IP, so they needed me. So it was easy to get back in the saddle, right? So because all the normal IP stuff had to happen. So that's one of those core skill sets within a unit that you got to have. And when you lose one of those guys, it's a big deal. So you want to get them back as quickly as possible. But I certainly felt like I had missed something in being away for 2 months and then coming back.
I think I missed like 6 months, so I missed a lot. And I know what you mean, like, because the things that tie you together is that shared misery. And so if you're not there to share it, then you're out of it. And that's a great example. I was thinking of that the other day too, because that guy was like on the jump into Normandy. Like he wasn't just some dude. I mean, he was like one of the core members, had gone through all the Currahee nonsense that they had.
He was a Currahee guy.
Yeah. And then he missed out on the Battle of Bulge because he was no shit wounded. And then brought back in. So that's a great example. I don't remember ever struggling at all. I remember guys being very like welcome back, and even dudes who I didn't have that much interaction with before, like some of the senior warrants, really kind of being like, "Hey man, welcome back." So I hadn't really thought about it until you started to mention that. And then
it's probably more self-imposed than real, right?
I think so.
I mean, I just felt that way. I can't say that anybody treated me differently, but I felt a little guilt.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of guilt to be felt. Did you feel, and I, you may not want to say if you did, but did you or your family feel after a while like maybe there was any resentment? Did you ever get that vibe from the other families? Because you're home, you're safe, and their husbands, their whatevers are still overseas or still, in the fight.
No,
did you think about that?
No, I don't think so. But what I did note, and this is a touchy subject, but like the notification chain, I told you about like when I was at the cache after I got medevac, they rolled me off the helicopter and they bring you into the triage, and then one of the nurses, you know, handed me a sat phone, said, "You want to, you know, do you want to call your wife or anybody?" And I said, "Yeah." You know, so I called her and said, "Hey, I'm fine. This is what's happened, yada, yada." And somehow I think one of, you know, the rumor mill had gotten word back to the rear before the official channels, like before the commanders, the rear D commander had the opportunity to release the information that one of the pilots had been wounded, right? And it got to everybody else through back channels first. And they were like, you know, it was a kind of a what I would call this typical sort of self-entitled, like, why wasn't I informed? Why wasn't this? Why wasn't that? Like, you know, it just generated unnecessary concern, or churn, I should say, unnecessary friction in those poor commanders that had to deal with that kind of stuff constantly. And we had some KIAs later on in the deployment too. And this was before like cell phones were like we didn't have cell phones. Cell phones were verboten for the first few years. But nevertheless,
even work there.
You could go to the internet cafe and type your emails and stuff like that. So that word made it back quicker to the family faster than official channels had an opportunity to deal with it. And so that bottom up sort of rumor mill like caused a lot of issues. And they were hounding my wife, like, you know, how come you didn't tell us? It's like, because it's none of your damn business. Like, you know.
Right.
So yeah, that was a little weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was a little friction on our end with wives, and I think part of it was miscommunication. Some of it was just anxiety. Some of it was just, we don't prepare people for those situations, particularly spouses. And I'm not throwing stones and saying that we do a bad job. I'm just saying, I don't know how you do it, but I think that in a lot of cases, spouses in that situation don't really know how to act with other spouses of people that are, you know, either deceased or wounded. I think even deceased, they kind of get it. Like there's sort of this sort of, you know, unspoken way of handling it. But if somebody's wounded, like, do you come over and check, or do you leave them alone? Do you give them some space? Like, what's the right answer? And I think we felt a little bit of that when I was home, which, you know, was kind of upsetting my wife, because she felt like she had this connection with these spouses, and then they suddenly were not necessarily as engaged with her as they once were. To this day, I don't really know why that is. You know, there's different theories. But yeah, I don't know, just something I thought of the other day when we were talking about that stuff.
Yeah. So
what about,
you know, later, like getting back into society and whatnot, like we were talking about PTSD ratings and whatnot. Like, you know, we talk about resilience a lot, and some people are better equipped to deal with things than others. You know, whether call it what you want, drama, I don't know, but like for the most part, particularly on quote unquote the trigger pulling, or, you know, the pilot side, like we would have indirect fire. It was almost weird. It was strange to watch our reactions when a mortar attack would land 200 meters away. Like you could hear it coming, and you know, like we were just like, all right, it landed over there, like it's over with. And you watch other people's reactions, and I'm not trying to like hold myself up or anything, but definitely like there's a different way we compartmentalize or approach things, or I don't know, maintain a certain calmness. I don't know how to describe it. But I could watch other people lose their shit. And I think that goes across all levels of society. So maybe the types that end up in the jobs that we do are just more predisposed to be able to mentally process that type of stuff. I'm not sure. Maybe there's an element of machismo in there where I can't, you know, like when we're sitting around with our buddies and, you know, you can't let your guard down in that regard, in that respect a little bit. So I think all of that plays into it a little bit. And this probably like maybe sets up one of your topics that you wanted to talk about tonight, like how we view other pilots. There's a cultural element to it too. Especially in the gun world, right? So, but when I was in my chew, or when I was enjoying my lunch or something, I couldn't be bothered to like run to the bunker because there was indirect fire coming in. Like, it is what it is.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, because I think part of it is, yes, people are predisposed to go to certain jobs where they're wired differently and they're going to take things. I think another part of that is the machismo. Another part of that is time in that environment. You become accustomed to it. I'm laughing because I remember going to Afghanistan. It was my second trip, and we'd only been there a couple days. And I think you and I talked about this the other day, but a rocket hit like right outside the RSO-9 tent, like day 2 of being there. And so I was a little on edge from indirect. I'm new to Kandahar. I don't know how accurate these guys are. And I remember like the day or two after that, I think I was in the chow hall and the siren went off and there was a boom and a lot of people dropped and I dropped. And I remember looking up and there was this like SF dude just sitting in a chair, like looking down at me like, you pansy, and I felt ashamed, like just straight up ashamed. I was like, this is not who I am. Like, what am I doing? I never do this, So yeah, I think you're right.
You just reminded me of something that always makes me chuckle. Like when we would go on R&R, right? You'd go back to one of the big air bases and you'd transport out of theater on a C-130 or a C-17 or some sort of Air Force transport, right? And so you'd have all the Army guys, whether the infantry or their pack clerks or aviators or whatever. Everybody, is in the helicopter, is in the back of those C-17s. And coming out of theater and especially going back in theater, like coming back from where did we go? Abu Dhabi or Dubai. That was one of the R&R spots, right? But even if you went on your 2-week R&R back to the States, you would flow into Kuwait on a commercial and then go onto your military transport at Ali Al Salim to go from Kuwait into theater. And when you cross that line of demarcation, like I remember always going in and out, like, we're at, I don't know, 20, 30,000 feet, right? And when they cross that border, that imaginary border from Kuwait into Iraq at 30,000 feet with no air threat, like all of a sudden the Air Force dudes would get real serious. The body armor would come on and, they do their tactical descents. And all the Army dudes just be, sleeping and, whatever. And the Air Force crew, the load masters and stuff would be looking out the windows. It's like, oh, I think I saw tracers. He's like, yeah, you probably did. They're about 30 miles away, but you probably saw some tracers. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember my last trip going into Iraq. It was my 3rd tour, and I was the squadron XO, and we were getting on the C-130, and I had all these new kids in the unit. It was our first trip, and they're getting ready to board the plane, the C-130. We were flying up to Erbil from Kuwait, and they're all putting on their body armor and their helmets and stuff, and I'm just carrying my stuff over my shoulder, and it made me feel a little bit like a badass, like, yeah, come on, dudes, because all these junior kids, and they're all looking at me and stuff, and I'm just plopping down, and I just like took a nap, like my armor is just laying there. And it, kind of reminded me in my head of like Hicks and Aliens, when they're doing the drop and the one dude's just passed out, and the lieutenant's over there freaking out.
That's exactly it. I mean, that was captured well.
I mean, exactly. I think that was a very true to life type scene.
I will tell you, and I don't know how we got off of like reintegration to this, but what really, like when I started to notice, or when my behavior changed, was especially on the later deployments, like when I wasn't so invested in like winning the war anymore, and it was just another time I was over there. like on day, on your 300th mission or whatever, like there's a time period, especially when you get into that last quarter of the deployment, where your spidey senses really start to go up, and there's a fatigue element. Like you're just damn tired because you've been flying your ass off for 8 months. Usually it's, going through cold winters and hot summers. It's physically demanding. You're flying more than you can possibly imagine flying stateside. But to cross the wire every single time you go to work, you are going into an unknown scenario where you don't know what's going to happen. And that mentally, that starts to it got to me after a while. Like, still did my job. But I was definitely like, on edge a little bit in terms of like being hyper aware and less willing to sort of roll the dice. Like, maybe I'll just take the conservative approach this time,
right.
and just make it down the backside of this hill and get back home. But that mental fatigue, I think, started to set in. And that's, historically, we were talking about accidents at the beginning. On a deployment, accidents happen in the first 60-ish days and in the last 60-ish days. The first 60 days is all the unknown. Like, you don't know where the hazards are. You don't know where the enemy is. You don't know the terrain. You don't know the weather. There's all those things that you're having to figure out on the fly as you're going into the combat zone. And the last 60 days is when you are just not mentally able to deal with all the parameters anymore and all the variables and all the stuff. You become complacent. And what would have caused you to take a step back and reassess in month 4, 5, and 6, like now you're either missing it or you're just not doing it. Like you don't care anymore. And then the last 30 days is when nobody takes any risks at all.
Right.
That's like, we got a 3,000-foot ceilings. Nah, it doesn't look good today.
Yeah, there's a cloud 10 miles away. It's probably a storm. We should stay home. Yeah. No, you're right. That's the truth.
Yeah, Cody and me were the last flight we were the last Seamus flight in theater, 2 IPs, both had been shot in the same cockpit, and we were the last 82nd helicopter to fly a mission in OF 910. We're like, man, maybe why is it us in the same cockpit together? Like, well, lightning can't strike twice, right? So,
right. I should have thought about this one beforehand. Well, the last thing, while we're still on the topic of reintegration, Jake, let's cue that clip up. I had him look for this clip. This clip has always fascinated me. Somebody brought it up in chat earlier, and exactly the one I was thinking of. Have you ever seen Hurt Locker, Bernd?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what, it's a terrible movie, but nothing against the actor Jeremy, whatever his name is. Great actor. I like his stuff, but the movie was shit. But this scene was interesting. All right, Jake, go ahead and play it.
I don't even remember this.
This is at the end. He's come back from the deployment and he's home. There's his lovely bride, his child.
I do know somebody that is just recently back from deployment would not have hair that long.
Yeah.
Got some soda. We done?
You want to go get us some cereal and I'll meet you at the checkout?
Okay. Cereal. Where?
So he's just like, this life is so inane. I can't believe I'm here. I've lost all my purpose.
Well, that's potentially right. So let's see how far the clip goes, because as I recall, it's an interesting transition. I don't know how far this one actually plays out.
Yeah, I only ever watched this once because I hated it so much.
Yeah, it was not awesome. Okay, and so I think what happens is like the next scene is like he links up with his wife and they whatever, and then like it cuts to him stepping off a C-130 full battle rattle back in the desert, and he does this little smile. As I remember it, because yeah, I've only seen it once, maybe twice. So what were you saying? What were your thoughts on that scene? Because I like that scene. I don't like that movie, but I like that scene.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I've got pictures of myself on R&R. Like, that's a surreal experience. Like when you come home on your mid-tour R&R and you go home for 2 weeks and you're back home, that transition is like, to me, like very weird, where you were flying combat missions and then you're home for, you know, it takes about 2 days to get home, and then your R&R starts and it takes about 2 days to get back. And you're just kind of, you step back into their lives. They have no idea what you've been doing, really, other than what you tell them. But that's not, you know, that's not a real sort of like day to day, like the stresses you're going through, et cetera. Like, you can't relate that. You have to live it. And to step back into your family's lives, like, that is absolutely true in terms of like, you know, here I am, I'm going to turn on and watch reality TV and waste time, maybe go to the beach, you know, and enjoy that time. But it was definitely like, it was a kind of a surreal experience.
Yeah, I think with that scene, because there's a couple ways to interpret, and I don't really know that there's a right answer or what they intended. You made a comment of like this sort of inane life, like there's no, you know, no purpose other than pick the cereal out. And I can see that. The other part that I see, the way that I've always interpreted that scene, and I've described this to other people when I talk about, you know, my own kind of experiences and coming out of deployments and stuff. It's the overwhelming choices. And I think that being deployed, you don't have to think about living, right? You just have to think about surviving, but everything is built for you. You don't have to figure out what to wear. You don't have to figure out what to eat, you know, generally speaking. I mean, you probably have some
Dude,
choices,
I go through a crisis every morning trying to pick out what I'm going to wear. Like, I never had to worry about that before.
Right. Yeah. When I worked, when I did an interagency thing at the FAA, you know, for a year when I was still in the Army, yeah, picking out what tie. Like, well, I wore that tie yesterday. I can't wear that tie today. Like, it sounds silly, but when you're an Army guy, like, you don't think about that kind of stuff. But but that's what I think about in that scene is like it's all those things. But part of it too, to me, the part that speaks is like is being overwhelmed with options where you've come from something where deployment is simple. Because I think that's what it boils down to is people ask like, well, what's it like to be deployed? Man, it's simple. It's almost, I mean, it's fun in a way, but it's so necked down to the basics that you don't have to think about all this obscure stuff, man. You just do your job, you have fun with the boys, and maybe you get to shoot stuff. But, you know, other than that, like, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about what kind of cereal to get.
Yeah. Yeah. The only choices like that guys probably struggle with are when they go into the PX and they got 55 different kinds of protein powder they got to go through to pick which one they want.
Yeah. Yeah. The choices we had in Terran Count was because we had that Baskin Robbins thing. So we had like 5 or 6 different ice cream flavors.
Yeah.
That was pretty tough, which I got to get one of my platoon leaders on because it was a classic line. I got to get him on just so I can make fun of him for it. But we were in Terran Count and you guys in Kandahar had the panini machines.
Yeah. Yeah.
We didn't have that. We were all roughing it up in Terran Count. And I remember him saying something. We were all sitting there eating chow one day, and he's like, man, I wish we had one of those panini machines. And I just, man, can you imagine the dudes in like the Battle of the Bulge if their ghosts could see us talking right now? We're in the middle of Kandahar or the middle of Afghanistan talking. We wish we had a panini press, you know? But that's the hard life that we live.
You just reminded me of an R&R story where this was OIF 2, 0405, but we, like I said, we had to flow through Balad to get on the transports to go to Dubai. And that was the first time, like, there was a crowd of maybe 10 or 15 of us, and we were walking around Balad. They had a swimming pool. They got the big PX where you can go in and buy whatever you want. Like, we had been living on a forward, quote unquote, semi-austere. For aviation, definitely austere, but our ground troops were like living out of their rucksacks and little forward cots and whatnot. But like, we didn't have the option to buy new gear. There was no KBR, the DFAC facilities. Like, our food was in Mermites. It was the heat in a can and open up kind of unit meal stuff. And that's what we lived on for months and months. And then you go to Balad, which is, REMF, rear echelon MFers. And they got everything basically. And you spend the night there, and we went into the big chow hall, and it happened to be Friday night. Like, hey, it's surf and turf night, steak and lobster night, right? So like, cool. Like, this is freaking awesome. They got ice cream, panini bar, steak and surf and turf, baked potatoes, like, you name it. And we're going through the line, just loading up. And we sat down at a big table, and 3 or 4 of us that were traveling together with just like grinning ear to ear with all the choices that we had. And we sat down across, and there was, I'm not talking pejoratively about the National Guard, but it was a National Guard E7 that came up, and he was clearly like not a PT Excel, top performer. And he sat down across from us, and he puts his tray down, and he just kind of looks at it, and he goes, "God dang it, steak and lobster again." and we were just all sitting across from him going,
"Get out of here."
Like, we hadn't had fresh food in probably 6 months, and like, that set the tone for me. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's the haves and the have-nots, and I don't blame, if you got it, use it. I mean, hell, in Kandahar, they had a TGI Fridays there for a while. But it did suck to be in a situation where you couldn't partake, but you could see it. And that, again, movie scenes, right? There's that scene in Saving Private Ryan, right? They finished the invasion of the beach. Tom Hanks goes up to headquarters, and dude's got like the big ass, like, just thinking about that sandwich just looks so tasty, like the roast beef or whatever. It just looks so good. And he's just watching these dudes who, they didn't storm the beach. They're chowing down on these big ass sandwiches. So yeah. You did mention it. The last thing I think we'll talk about tonight, since we're running into it, is how pilots view other pilots. Because you were telling a story to me the other day. I think you said you thought they were F-16 pilots. It really doesn't matter, but tell us that story, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. So this was in Kandahar in 09-10, and Kandahar, otherwise known as CAF, is in RC South in Afghanistan, and it's a big hub. Like, there's 2 big hubs in Afghanistan. There's Bagram Air Force Base, and there's Kandahar Air Base. And so that's where everything flows into and out of. So we happen to be stationed on CAF, and you were part of our organization, but you were actually separated at a smaller base called Tarankout. But Kandahar was also multinational, and so you had not UN. Yeah, it was UN or NATO, I guess.
It was NATO, yeah.
And so you had all flavor, like everybody, all the NATO nations kind of approached. There was 2 ROEs, like, the rules and everything were a little bit, everything was more convoluted because you had a multinational force there. But every country brought a little bit of their own, like, back home flavor. So the Germans had a PX, the Dutch had a PX. Some of them served alcohol, like the Germans and the Dutch. They could drink alcohol in theater. Us Americans could not. But you could go into their PX and buy like nice chocolates and all different kinds of stuff. So options you didn't have up in TK, obviously.
Right. No.
But one of the things we had there, which is pretty famous for being downrange, is Green Beans Coffee. So think of like that's a Canadian company, and so we had the Canadians were there with us. The Canadians were good shit. Like they were out there. They were one of the quote unquote fighting forces. Most of the European countries did administrative stuff, like stayed within the air base. The Canadians and the Brits were actually across the wire with us. But they had a Green Beans Coffee there, and there's no I don't think there was a Starbucks at the time, but Green Beans is the same. So we would go and, get an iced coffee or, get a coffee every day. And we're standing in line and, it's the only joint in town. So there was usually like a 20-minute wait to go through there. And so we just, stand in line, wait to cycle up and place our order. And we were talking about the previous day's events, and I don't remember the exact circumstances, but we were, talking about some fight that we had gotten into, and referencing like where it was and what had happened a little bit, who we were talking to, etc. And maybe 4 or 5 places behind us, there was some green suit, pickle suit wearing guys. So Air Force, and they were within earshot and they were just listening to us. And, they kind of chimed in at one point and they were like, "Hey, so you guys helicopter pilots, like, what do you guys do?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're 58 guys." "Oh, what's your call sign?" "Oh, we're Seamus." "What are you guys?" And I forget what they were. I'll make something up. They were Falcon or whatever. But when we said, "Yeah, we're the 58 guys," we were down over at near Frontenac, 3 days ago. He's like, "Oh yeah, we were overhead. You guys are Seamus?" And then they got real quiet. Like I could tell they were wanting to come into the conversation, like injecting where the role they had, we dropped a bomb or whatever it was. But when we told them we were the 58 guys and basically we're the ones that they're always watching, dusting it up, like literally in the dust, they sort of got a little bit quiet. And so, "Yeah, you guys are in the mix all the time, huh?" And you could tell that they were, that thought was percolating in their heads. So we got a couple cool points that day with the Air Force.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting, like how we all get along. I struggle to think of anyone that I know in another community, whether it's a fighter pilot, whether it's a lift guy, a 160th guy. Like we talk shit about all of them. We all do it to each other, right? But I don't know of anyone where I'm like, "Yeah, screw that guy." Like there's probably 1 or 2, that just because of the nature of who they are has nothing to do with what they fly. And I just always thought that was interesting, like the duality of that relationship that we all have, and how we get along. Jake, were you able to get that picture working?
I can screen share it. Give me 2 seconds.
So
yeah,
I mean, just while he's doing that, but just to kind of like tie a couple threads together, like that was one of the few times where it was cooler to be a helicopter pilot than a jet fighter pilot, right? That was one of the times where I felt like I came out ahead.
Right.
Years and years ago, I was deployed to JTF 6, Joint Task Force 6, which was in El Centro, California, which is the border patrol mission. This was 99, I think. And we're out there for a couple of months. And El Centro is where the Blue Angels train off season. So they go there and they spend the winter there. And we were operating out of a hangar and flying our border patrol mission every night. And some F-16 or F-14s had come in on a, TDY, and they were doing some cross-country training or something. And they were there for a couple of days. So we wandered over there to their hangar one day just to, we were off cycle or whatever, just killing time. We're poking around the aircraft. Like we wandered into the hangar and we're, kicking the tires on the F-14 and, checking things out. And one of the pilots came over and he was like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" It's like, we were like super friendly there. I was a W1, maybe a W2 at the time. I don't remember. There was 3 or 4 of us. And we had like two guys had their pickle suits on, so they quote unquote looked like pilots, and we had our old school like two-piece ABDU flight suits on. So we didn't really look like pilots. So he wasn't really sure what to make of us. Like he didn't know what warrant officers were. He's a Navy JG or whatever, right? So he didn't really know where we fit in. He was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I was like, "Hey, cool aircraft, man. Like, love the F-14. We're just striking up a conversation with him." And when it came out, like when he asked us what we did, it was like, "Oh, we're the helicopter pilots. We're flying the 58s from across the ramp." Like immediately, he went just like he just shut down. He's like, "You guys aren't worthy of my time. Like, get the fuck out of my hangar." Like the conversation was over. So he knew we were pilots, but when it came out we were Army helicopter pilots, like he just
garbage.
You guys are like, get out of here.
I went to the Joint Firepower course. Yeah, here's that picture. I don't know if you can make that bigger. This picture's so funny. It's the old, for those who can't see it, it's the old G.I. Joe, at the end, knowing is half the battle type thing, but it's got Flint, and I think that's Flint. I don't remember. And he's looking at three kids, and they're saying, "Sir, how long does it take the average person to become an attack pilot?" So, "Sorry, son, but the average people don't become attack pilots." I love this one because it's always, I see it pop up all the time in social media, and immediately the 60 dudes roll in with, only below average people become attack, right? So there's different ways to interpret it, and it's always just, and it becomes a rumble in the jungle about it.
And
then we counter with, "Well, you guys sit next to each other so you can hold hands," like it evolves.
One of my favorite cartoons, Jake, if you can look for the Ambiguously Gay Duo,
sure.
Google that real quick. But that's, the rivalry between the 58 community and the 64 community going back into antiquity has always been pretty good. Like, we love each other, but one of my favorites was, making fun of the tandem seating Apache dudes.
Yeah.
It's, you remember that? It's a cartoon from SNL.
And
it was on live commercial TV, so it's perfectly fine to show. But that's the one I always bust out, even though I are an Apache pilot now.
Well, the Ace and Gary.
Gary and Ace,
Another one, and this will shut people down too. The Mover's here. He says that's our new Tinder profile. From Firebirds, of course, the panties on the head. That was another good one when 58s are still around. I remember we were driving out to Molinelli. So Molinelli, for those who don't know, is the gunnery range in flight school. So that's where you would go out and do all your training. What would happen is if Bernd and I were students together, one of us would fly out in the aircraft and the other would ride in a bus, and then we would meet out there. So when I'm done with my iteration of shooting, I would get out and ride the bus home, and he would then fly back with the instructor pilot. So I'm on this bus with this other dude. He was an Australian by birth, but he was a U.S. citizen. So he was just witty as hell, as most Australians are. And so we're on the bus, and there's this one Apache student, and he's just a loud mouth, just running his mouth all the time about 58. Rah, 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 says something. And I think one of us, me or I think it was me, I said to him, "Hey man, when do you guys start wearing the panties on your head, for training?" And the Aussie did not miss a beat. He's like, "Better question, when do you stop wearing panties?" And it just, just shut the dude down for a second. It was a good feeling. But you get those gentle ribbings in the community.
One of the hardest things that I had to get used to was having to punctuate every sentence with "attack" after I went to the APC.
Yeah. It's a different community. But again, kind of going back, like, I think we always in the aggregate look at the other communities like they're just a bunch of, just douchebags. Doesn't matter what, right? It's like, oh, you're a fighter pilot, you're a douchebag. Oh, you're a 160th guy, you're a douchebag. Oh, you're 58. We all kind of lump in. But then when you get to know these dudes, like, again, it's very hard to like think of a guy and say, no, actually, that guy's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it's always a culture, culture thing. But That meme popped up the other day and it just made me think of it.
Yep. Every time there was some sort of infraction on the range, it's a 60 dude. Any sort of almost midair, any sort of like, impact area incursion, whatever, it's a 60 dude.
Yeah. Well, I think certain communities do lend themselves to doing certain things. I'm trying to think what 58 guys were known for other than just being badasses. I can't think of anything. I think
trying to talk to ATC when we're trying to practice instruments. That's like notoriously. That's what they all make fun of us. Well, the Apache guys too, back in before the Echo, right? They didn't.
Yeah.
Our instrument
it was an emergency.
Kind of a joke.
Yeah, I mean, it was an emergency. In fact, I was just flying with a guy the other day, a captain, and we were talking about training, like, where we came from and stuff. And I mentioned to him, like, yeah, when I started my fixed wing training, 15, 20 years after I'd started flying, I had like 8 hours of actual weather time, and that was like 3 hours in flight school and like the whatever mandatory 5 hours I had in the Echo model transition. But that was it, because we just didn't fly instruments. We didn't really have the the thing. Discord sounds happening. Is that coming through? Anyway. Yeah. Anyway, I thought that was funny. That meme just popped up the other day and it made me think about it. We could probably go on.
The one there's one I love. There's an Air Force, probably a lieutenant. He's on one of those hoverboards, the wheeled hoverboards that you stand on and you kind of lean forward, and he's going past some. Yeah, he's going past some enlisted guy, and he's wheeling past him, giving a salute. Like, this is the most Air Force thing I've seen all day.
Yeah, he's got his nice green pickle suit, looking sharp. Probably hasn't flown in years, but he's wearing the pickle suit every day. Yeah, 100%. All right. Well, I guess we've been rattling on long enough. Like I said in the beginning, this is sort of just incoherent from the beginning. That was kind of the plan. We just wanted to get together and chat. So Bernd and I had talked a little bit over the weekend and just figured out we just jump on here. So I think if you're cool with it, I think we'll kind of do this, every so often. If you're good, we need to grab some other dudes. We need to grab Luke up. Definitely. I talked to him the other day about coming on. So, the three of us can BS. And just tell stupid.
Yeah, notice I also have a helmet that mysteriously fell off a truck.
Yeah, just found one just like your helmet. Yeah, it's what you got another one there too, though. Is that
that's like an old SPH4. That's what I started with.
Oh, really? Because you crewed.
Yeah, and that just fell off my hand receipt. Like, I never had to.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird how that stuff happens. Yeah. Well, it's so weird too with your hand receipt, like the things that really do fall off, and then you're stuck with it, and you're like, well, I have this stuff still, and and then they don't want it or whatever. It's very strange. I mean,
you're making me turn in my black trench coat that you gave me in 1994 that like isn't even in the inventory anymore. Like, why is that still on my hand receipt?
When I cleared Fort Hood, the artist formerly known as Fort Hood, and this was 2018, they wanted my aviator glasses, the ones they issue at which I'd never worn. I'd lost them for years ago, and they wanted those back, and you could not clear without it. And I was like, well, how much does that cost? And I looked in the little book there, like this book like this thick, just everything in it, And I looked, I was like, $10. I was like, all right, I'm paying that right now. But very strange. But then I had like body armor left over. I mean, because you know how it is when we deployed, it got to the point where they would just throw stuff at you. Remember, you'd like, hey, tomorrow we're going to RFI, the Rapid Fielding Initiative. We're going to RFI. And you knew you were leaving with 2 or 3 duffel bags full of everything. Just the cold weather clothing alone, you could open a store. It was ridiculous. In fact, when I cleared Hood, I turned in, I want to say I took in 2 shopping carts full of nothing but cold weather gear.
I still have a bunch of stuff that's still in the plastic wrapper that's 20 years old.
Yeah.
And that that's stuff that it goes next to your skin, so they don't take a lot of the that undergarment stuff back.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I ever do go hunting in Alaska, I'm well stocked.
Yeah, you're totally prepared. Yeah, it was a great feeling to get rid of all that stuff.
Or something.
What's that?
Do you have like a Casmo mailbag portion or?
Oh no, I'm not as advanced as Mover. He's got phone in stuff and he's got all kinds of questions. Yeah, I don't have it. Share. No, Jake, it's fine. With that moment has passed. He's asking me if we should share the.
I was a little concerned about that one.
Gary. No, I mean that one's fine. Like you said, it has been on TV, but who knows these days? But if you don't know who Ace and Gary is, you should definitely go.
Oh, you couldn't find it? Yeah.
I think he found it, but he was scared.
Ah, come on. We're all politically correct here.
Scared is the right word.
Scared is the right word. Mover says he feels attacked. No, not at all. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. This train wreck, we'll put a stop to it. And I appreciate you guys watching. And I don't know, we'll get together soon. I don't know when that'll be.
This is fun, man. Hey, there's Luke right there.
Yeah, I know. All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay.